All right, so this next question is open to all of you as well. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on why representation in children's books is so critical.
So for me, the importance of representation is personal. Growing up, I was a huge bookworm. My dad would take my brother and me to the library almost every weekend, and it was so powerful for me. It's where I fell in love with books, and it's where I gained that first spark of an interest in writing. But it wasn't until I was a freshman in high school where I really saw myself and my family reflected in a book. And that was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. It was assigned to my class to read in freshman English. And I remember my teacher passed out the copies and told us to put them away because we had to start our lesson. But I just snuck that book under my desk and I kept turning the pages. I couldn't put it down. It sucked me in, not only because the story itself is really engrossing and the writing is really powerful, but it was like Amy Tan peered inside my brain and like kind of walked around and was telling the story of my grandmother and my mom. It was just one of those moments that I didn't know I needed of seeing my family recognized, of seeing our experiences validated. And it really changed me. And the reason I started volunteering at WDB in 2014 when the group first started was because I didn't want other kids to have to wait until high school or college or even later to find themselves in a book. And especially as a new mom at the time, I really didn't want her growing up in a world where she would have to wait to see herself in a book. I wanted her to be able to take that for granted.
I had a very similar experience to Caroline. I grew up also at the library every Sunday, and I would just consume all the Judy Blume books, all the Beverly Cleary books. I honestly never saw a book with a biracial character. And it wasn't until I was an adult. And at that point, I was writing all the time and I'd gone to a writing conference. And the editor was like, why doesn't the main character represent you? And I realized I was writing stories, the same stories that I had read, and it always starred white females. I did not want a kid to feel like that their life, their self-worth, their story didn't matter. Everybody should see themselves in the story. And, for me, it was also not just about race, but it was also, I was a fat child. I suffered from depression. There was definitely different intersections, different parts of myself that just never felt validated. But it's so empowering to know not only that there's going to be a child out there that's going to see and read this story, and there's going to be something about themselves that they're going to see in it. And it empowers them. It gives them a voice and inspires them for a future to make change and to just forge ahead.
Both of you put that so beautifully. I have the privilege as a white woman, as a white girl, to see myself reflected in that aspect in a lot of books that I read. But my queer identity, I didn't see represented in anything that I was reading growing up. I did not realize that I was bisexual until I was in my 20s because heteronormativity, I thought, I like guys, I'm straight. That's how that works, right? It's been so powerful and so heartwarming to see more nuanced queer stories really coming to the forefront in children's and young adult publishing these days. There are so many things that I see in catalogs that I'm buying in that I just think, wow, if I'd had this at that age, I would have known so much more about myself so much sooner. And in general, I think it is so important and so powerful for children and teens to be able to see themselves represented in the books that they're reading to build self-esteem, and also to be able to see identities that they're not as familiar with, experiences that they're not as familiar with, to foster empathy and to learn how to relate to other people in the world.
Thank you all for sharing that. It's just so wonderful to hear the personal perspective about representation in diverse books and really the through line of I want something different for future kids.